Welcome to the Upshot, multiple disc golf podcast about the latest in the disc golf world. I'm the publisher, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me is Josh Mansfield on this Tuesday, September 12th. The Discmania Open is all wrapped up in Canada, and we get ready for the MVP Open this coming weekend. Josh, we've got a fun one today. Mailbag time. It's been a while, and we have a lot of questions. So we're going to dig into that in just a moment. But first things first, ratings update. We've got some ratings news, and everybody has been waiting on pins and needles to see if Chris Tatar was going to eclipse 1,000 rated. Not quite. 999 and a tenth. And that rounds to 999. She becomes the highest FPO rated player of all time, surpassing Paige Pierce. And she only needs to average about, I think, 1,005 or so over the next month in order to cross that 1,000 mark. It's very possible, Josh. She has been playing at the level required to get over the hump.
Yeah, the nerve-wracking part here, she did not play at that level last year MVP. She had only one round above 1,005 rated. 1,003 was round one, and after that it was a little bit lower, including a 955. But I think she has had a higher ceiling this year and had performances that really do have the opportunity to push her over it. I hope she gets it. It's 999 is already incredible. Here's the question I've got for you, Charlie. If you are Latitude 64, do you run with the 999 discs and start selling out for the highest rated player, or do you hold out hoping that she hits the 1,000 mark?
I think you got to hold out, Josh. I think you got to hold out because it just, I don't know. I could see doing both. Maybe why not? But it's going to sell a lot more when she gets to 1,000.
It is, but what if she doesn't get it this year? You miss out on selling a whole run of 999 discs.
Yeah. I mean, are you going to buy a 999 disc?
No, I'm probably not going to buy a 999 disc.
That's what I'm saying. Missy Gannon has now caught Owen Scoggins in 981. They are tied for second highest rated females in the world. And Calvin Heimberg is still at 1051, top rated MPO player. Josh, he is not, well, by the way, Manabu Kajiyama, he's fallen back to earth as we might have expected. So I think he's down at 1029 now, which is a little bit more appropriate, I think.
Yeah.
I want to point out, although Calvin Heimberg is the highest rated player in the world, UDisc now has Eagle McMahon as the number one player in its world rankings ahead of Calvin Heimberg. And I wanted to ask you about that. What do you think about that?
Well, I guess it was a really important silver event to go hit up in Canada, right? That makes no sense. I don't understand that at all. Yeah, I think there can be arguments for other people, right? If you look over Statmando official rankings, still has Calvin Heimberg in number one, Gannon Byrne number two. Statmando official rankings doesn't even have Eagle on their rankings, but on their power rankings, they have Isaac in first and Eagle in fourth. And I could see an argument for that over Calvin, but Eagle in first, I just don't think he has any business being there right now.
Okay, so here's the since preserve. Okay, Eagle, fourth. Sorry, I had to dodge President's Cup there. Second, third at Worlds, first Discmania Open. Okay, Calvin, same stretch. Second, third, fourth, second, fifth at Worlds. Fifth at Worlds. So, I guess maybe Eagle is slightly better because of the higher finish at Worlds. But those are very comparable, and it's not even a question who's been better the rest of the season. Okay, so I don't understand. The UDisc World rankings are all over the place.
UDisc World rankings, just look at the past 10 days. It's a real
it feels
short.
like it overweights slightly what's happened in the last month or two. I'm sure I could look at the formula and think about it some more, but it doesn't pass the eye test for a world ranking, which feels like it should be way slower to move. The weird thing about a world ranking should be that like Ricky and Paul are still like top 3, right? Because it takes so long for the results to kind of work themselves out over time. It's like in tennis. Who was it in the final? Sabalenka? Is that her last name? Who did Coco Gauff beat in the final?
I don't remember.
Sabalenka.
I thought you were going to
Arena
ask
Sabalenka. I don't know why I couldn't think of it. Sabalenka is the new number 1 in the world, even though she lost in the final. It was determined because, you accumulate a certain amount of points by getting to certain spots. And that's, over the course of many months, she has established herself to get to that point. And it didn't matter what happened in the final. She was still going to become number 1. So anyway.
It's silly that Eagle's in first. I don't think you can even make, like, I can't even see the argument for the short term. StatMando defines their long one as 24 months and their short one as 15 weeks. And so their 15-week one has Isaac Robinson at the top. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, that checks out. But I can't, literally, outside of 10 days, I'm like, how do you pick Eagle? Anything before D-Glow, and Calvin has outplaced Eagle.
I mean, if you want to look for an argument, Josh, it's that he's outperformed Calvin at the majors, and that's probably the argument. And has, since this kind of a slower start, been pretty damn good since then, not missing the top 5 since OTB Open. I mean, it's not like Eagle's been bad, and he was second at Champions Cup. He and Calvin tied at European, and he was better than Calvin at Worlds.
I mean, that's fair, but Eagle also skipped Ledgestone and Idlewild, while Calvin managed to do second at both. Like,
yep, not wrong.
Yeah, no, fair argument, but I still give it to Calvin.
Okay, well, let's get into our mailbag. Really quick, Discmania Open. Ella Hansen gets her first tour win. It wasn't really a field to, look, congrats to Ella. You still got to go win it, and she did.
Yep.
But it's not like this was a real tournament. It just wasn't. And then on the MPO side, crazy multi-hole playoff, and Eagle comes away the victor over Isaac Robinson. I got to be honest. I saw somebody post this in the Discord. If you're watching the tournament this weekend, you're a real sicko. And that's just true. I'm sorry. You're a disc golf sicko if you were tuned in daily to the Discmania Open. I did not tune in, I will admit.
I also did not. I was enjoying football this weekend.
Yes. Go Niners. Sorry about the loss, Josh. It was close.
Oh, that hurts. It's good. At least the rest of the AFC imploded too.
The Upshot is presented by Pound Disc Golf, makers of the best bags in the sport. When Cole Redallen dropped by Pound HQ to pick out the colors for his signature Rufus, he also asked that the long pockets get converted into Hall pockets. Pound created the double convertible Rufus. Cole's signature Rufus also features double cell phone pockets and double lower zippered side pockets, as well as Velcro receiving patches and a matching Cole Redallen patch. The double convertible Rufus also comes standard with one insulated Hall pocket insert to keep your beverages protected and cold. So head over to PoundDiscGolf.com, get yourself a Pound bag today. So let's dive into our mailbag. Thank you to everybody sending in. You can always reach us at upshot@ultiworld.com. You can also email mailbag@ultiworld.com. And Josh, I'll let you pick the first question today. Let's dive in.
Let's just take Nate sends us an email. He says, which pros are using this year's World Championships as a gauge to see if they should continue playing or possibly retire? I'm thinking some of the commentators, Yuli, Big Germ, and Sexton specifically. All of these players played out at Smugs in 2018. Do you think they had expectations to do as well as they did back 5 years ago? And now that we've had this year's Worlds, will they use this year's Worlds to check the status if they are relevant or not?
All right, so here's some numbers. Big Germ finished 32nd in 2018. He finished 40th this year. Ulibarri finished 4th in 2018, 40th this year. Nate Sexton was 21st in 2018, 84th this year. Another notable like Greg Barsby, of course, who won it 5 years ago, was 55th this year. These guys are getting close to the hang 'em up days. Let's just admit it. I don't think that's anything crazy to say. Shout out to Yuli, who really has kind of had a resurgence. Maybe not his best performance at the Worlds, but he's had a nice last like 2 to 3 months, and gotten back into some semblance of the form that we saw from him back in the day, when he was a consistent top 10 finisher at majors for a long, long time. But look, it's not any kind of shock to say that these guys are nearing the final days. And the question is, how do they look at it? Because right now, they go to tournament, they play, they win, they lose. They're still doing Jomez, and they're still getting paid to be doing the Jomez. And if they're not out there on the tour, are they doing the Jomez? And so that's the question that I would have. I think Nate Sexton is more or less done. And like already. He's already been done. He's going because he needs to like maintain a presence. But I am...
And sell some fireworks.
Yes! This guy doesn't need anything besides the royalties from the Firebirds to live a comfortable life at this point. And I don't think he's ever going to be highly competitive at an elite tournament ever again. I don't think he's probably practicing as much. I don't think he cares as much. And that's okay. That's totally natural. I do think he's going to remain extremely relevant, and I think probably all of them will, in media, in one way or another. Sexton going full-time to DGN soon would make a lot of sense to me.
The one big thing that you're going to have to see from Sexton, it's interesting because, like you said, Sexton's more or less hung it up already, but what would really need to happen is he would need to commit to not playing the majors and instead prioritizing the fact that he is the best color commentator available, and thus, if he wants to get paid by DGN, he needs to be working the majors. And so that's going to be a decision that he's going to have to make. And I hope he makes it, because I would much prefer to see him in the booth and then down the leaderboard. But I think that's the last real decision left for Sexton. But I mean, Big Germ and Yuli, like, those guys could play until they're 60 if they wanted. Who cares? They show up. They throw the disc around a little bit, and then they go collect their paycheck from working Jomez real quick. Like, if that's what they enjoy doing, I don't think the two are incompatible, as opposed to Nate, who is going to have to eventually make the choice about his partial tour versus being on DGN.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not like Nate he's played more this year than he has in the last few years. You know, there was the COVID stuff and everything else, but I mean, he played LBC, Waco, Austin, OTB, Beaver State, Portland, Preserve. He went to the European Open. He did Idlewilds, then he was at Worlds, but you know, he's only finished in the top 10 once at Waco. He's been way out of the conversation.
Next best finish is 25th.
Yeah. So, you know, when you're not cashing at some of the events that you're going to, at some point you're probably like, do I need this? It really depends on what he wants. You know, it doesn't matter, right? Whether he cashes, he doesn't cash. If he enjoys playing, he'll play. If he feels like this is a chore, I don't want to do it anymore, and he just decides to go do DGN, that would make a lot of sense to me. Okay, next question. Here we go. Last year, this is from Lance. You talked like it was a lock for Paul McBeth to break Ken Climo's majors record. After this season, what percentage do you put on him tying it or on him breaking it? And what odds would you need to bet against him tying or breaking the record? Let me note, Lance, before I let Josh answer. The season is not over yet. There's still another major. But Josh, go ahead. What do you think?
I think this is a really interesting question, because he's absolutely right. The language and just the narrative that we have talked, even around the majors, was drastically different. And Paul, remember last year, comes out and has a pretty slow season relative to Paul standards, but still maintains an excellent European Open, comes in second place to Eagle, and then comes back and wins Worlds. And so it still felt like Paul was very relevant and very capable of winning enough majors to tie that record. What really is kind of hitting him here is the fact that he broke that second streak for the first time in over a decade. He finishes outside the top 2 at Worlds. And it definitely becomes a bigger question. I still think the odds are pretty good of him tying. It's hard to put a percentage on that. I still like the odds of him tying. Beating or breaking the record, though, 2 more majors, that's a big question mark if he doesn't win USDGC this year. And one that I really kind of have a question mark on, because it doesn't feel likely to me that Paul wins 2 majors in a season again. I don't think he does that next year. And so that means we need at least, the rest of this year and 2 more years of Paul getting back and staying in the swing to win majors. There's a real question mark there.
If I'm going to put a number on it, I'd say he's 40% to tie, 25% to surpass. Maybe that's a little too high. 20% to pass.
Interesting. I probably would take the against in passing.
Maybe. I mean, look, Macbeth hasn't had it this year. But like at Worlds, he comes in, he's hurt, he hasn't played for weeks, and so what do you know? He's like a little rusty and off the mark. And it's not like he played bad. I just think he's gonna have that weekend where he's unstoppable. We've already seen it this year. At PCS, he was unstoppable. He had the old McBeastie look to him. And I know he's going to do it again. I just know it in my bones. The question is whether he's going to do it twice. It's only getting harder, right? It's already gotten so much harder, and it's only going to keep getting harder from here. Is he going to be able to pull it off? But, I mean, he's on home turf next year for Worlds. Don't forget.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, I just think, like, with renewed motivation to train in the off season and the skill that he brings to the table and the killer instinct that he brings to the table, he's going to get another one. I don't know when. I don't even necessarily know that I would bet on it happening next year, but Macbeth, every time, how many times have people tried to write this guy off? Oh, he's washed, he's done. And then he wins again a month later. This is literally this has happened for every year for 5 years. And he just keeps winning. So I'm not going to count this man out. I would say 20% to pass and break the record. I mean, think about the motivation he has to do that and truly cement GOAT status.
Yeah, but I mean, I could run an entire B reel of Instagram posts about Macbeth's motivation to do something, like about how he's got the chip on his shoulder, about unfinished business. Okay. Like, come on,
what's next? What's next?
Well, let's keep going with this kind of theme, the majors. First question of this 2-parter comes from Disco Biscuit with Ricky, and this is in the Discord. With the Ricky versus Paul era being finished, where does this leave Ricky's legacy? Paul's is set regardless of what he does going forward, but Ricky feels like he's in an elite place that doesn't quite transcend into whatever echelon Macbeth and Climo reached. In the same vein, does Ricky have a shot at getting into that echelon given the depth of the field? Feels like he missed his chance over the years.
Right now, Ricky is 4th all-time in major wins. He's behind Climo, Macbeth, and Feldberg. Feldberg has 7 major victories. Ricky has 6. He's ahead of Barry Schultz. He's ahead of Nate Doss, Schusterich, Jenkins, Rico, LeCastro. The list goes on and on and on. I think Ricky will forever be looked at as one of the greats. Unfortunately for him, it'll be like Mickelson and Woods. There's Tiger, and there was Phil. There's Paul, and there was Ricky. And there's going to be plenty of Ricky fans, but he will never, ever be considered as good as Paul, even though he had many seasons where he was better than Paul. We could go probably year by year at some point and think about who had the better season, Paul or Ricky. And there were definitely years where Ricky was better. His World Championship years, I think you could definitely argue that. And some of the more recent years, like 2021, 22, you could definitely make the case. The problem, of course, is that he's on a very long major drought. And that sticks in our mind right now. But when you really zoom out and you think about the legacy of the player, I think it would be really nice for him to get past Feldberg. To win one or two more majors would really make him feel like he defined this era alongside Paul and not just as a kind of a coda.
And this is the story, you bring up the Tiger Phil, but how many sports does this exist in? Like, all the time. Brady and Rogers, the list could go on of the number of like sports that have your dominant and the one who is really going to like reach GOAT status, and then the one who is in any other era would be the player, would be the guy.
I mean, there are still people who think Rogers is a better quarterback than Brady. He didn't win as much, but people think he was a better quarterback.
That is true. I don't agree with that. But you're right. And there probably are people who will, like, I don't know if they will argue but that for Ricky, but I think they will argue like that Ricky does deserve a place there. I don't think he is in the same vein. I agree with the premise of this question that McBeth and Climo have separated themselves, and I don't think anything Ricky can do will put him in with those three.
Aside from some insane streak of like winning 5 majors over the next 2 years or something, it's impossible.
Right. But that doesn't mean that Ricky couldn't be kind of top of the class of tier 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think he basically already is. But
yeah.
Will he win another one? Taco Riddles asks it, and I'll ask you, Josh. Major, that is.
Let's see. This year, he's 12th at Worlds, 6th at European Open. Didn't play Champions Cup. Or DNF'd, I don't remember. But does not have a finish at Champions Cup. I'm gonna say no. He is not. This is something we've been talking about, is that Ricky has not been playing well at the majors lately. I mean, he still gets wins at Elite Series, but just really has struggled at the majors. And the amount he's winning, I mean, last season was pretty special, getting those 5 victories. But this year, I mean, he's got preserved, and that's it. Got a silver, but so I'm gonna go no. I don't think he does.
I'm gonna say he gets one more. He's had 5 top 3s since 2019. He was second at Champions Cup last year. I think he's going to get one more. Okay.
So one more question about these two.
Sure.
And then we'll change subjects. This comes from Mikey in the Discord as well. He says, Paul McBeth has seemingly transcended to a place in a sport where wins at Elite Series events won't affect his legacy too much. True. If he were to begin to slim his schedule, how could he divert his time and efforts to make the biggest impacts on the sport? Could it be taking time off to better prepare for majors, focusing more time on the foundation, course design, etc.?
Oh, most impact on the sport. I mean, I think from a competitive standpoint, obviously, him being maximally prepared for majors is obvious. But from a impact on the sport side, I really see McBeth as an ambassador for disc golf in a way that is difficult for other people to achieve because they don't have the just insane pedigree that he has as a player. McBeth is friends with pro athletes from other sports because they're like, this guy is the greatest to do it. And so the foundation is a piece of that. And I think that has a chance to be an incredible, long-lasting legacy for him now and in the future. I mean, we could have Paul McBeth Foundation 100 years from now. Now, what could he do besides that? I would think about, could he become somebody who goes and does speaking circuit things, like goes to conferences about leadership or, sports, strength and conditioning, like stuff like that. And he becomes a keynote speaker talking about his career as a disc golfer and giving back to the sport. You can imagine him in those kinds of settings. He's not necessarily the world's greatest public speaker, but I think that because he's so great at what he does, and because he has the incredibly intelligent like business mind, I think he could really excel in a setting like that, where he's able to kind of bring disc golf to the masses in a non-sporting capacity in terms of like growth and leadership and, just better human being type of stuff. And so I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I could imagine him in a future being more of that kind of true ambassador, always positive, always talking about, how disc golf teaches us about life.
It's funny because you say that Paul's not the best public speaker, but the point I was going to make is I think he is the most savvy media and public speaking pro that has a pedigree enough to be the face of the sport. And that's why I think he's the perfect fit for that, because I look at the guys around him and I think he's miles ahead of Ricky in this department. And his public presence, I think, is so much better. That's why I think this is such an important role for him to take on, because I look at the players around him and I think he actually is the best. He's the best person that we could have as the face of the sport, both in pedigree and in his media skills, presence, and awareness.
Little quick hitter here from Eric. Mulligan alert. Charlie ended the interview episode last week by calling the MVP Open the best regular season tour event. Put some respect on the playoffs. I will not. I'm sorry. It is not until it actually does not allow players in a meaningful way. I'm not going to call it a playoff event. It's still a regular season tournament, and we have one playoff event. It's called the Pro Tour Championship. Sorry.
Yep.
Okay. Let's talk about a transition question. Now that we've decided that we've officially entered a new era, is an appropriate name for this new era the Legends versus the Field era? I would deem Legends of the sport to be those who have multiple Elite Series or major victories and have shown dominance before the 2023 season. This would be players like Paul Macbeth, Ricky Wysocki, Eagle McMahon, Simon Lizotte, Calvin Heimberg, and Chris Dickerson. You could even argue James Conrad, given that he won majors in back-to-back years, or even Nico LaCastro. This year, out of 17 Elite Series or major events, a legend has won only 6 of the 17, about 35%. On any given week, you would likely bet on at least one of the legends to make the top 3 or even win the event, but in this era, there's a much better chance that someone from the field hits their ceiling and takes down the event. That's from Farm Drew. So what do you think, Josh? You like Legends versus the field?
There was a lot of chatter in here about this topic, about the questions, and I think this is I like this one the best in this take, because it establishes 2 things for me that I think are really important about this era. Number one is that legends are still outsized in their representation of the sport, right? These 5-6 guys listed still managed to win 35% of the Elite Series and majors, which, math, just basic math says that they should only have won, 2 maybe, based on, actual percentages. But the fact that they're still winning 35% of these events and may win more is one that I think shows that legends, or having those kind of designation for people who we expected to be good, is an important aspect of the current competitive field in MPO. I don't know if the field is quite the right name, because I think there are some people that we're seeing who deserve a little bit more credit than that, right? It's not that the case that every other tournament has been won by there's a different winner for every other tournament outside of these 6 that has been won by legends. In fact, Isaac and Gannon combined account for 5 of the rest. So Isaac and Gannon by themselves have almost as many victories as the legends this season.
Mm-hmm.
So the field feels like it does a little bit of disrespect to some of the young guys who deserve credit. If you add Isaac, Gannon, and Cole, there you go. Like Isaac, Gannon, and Cole have as many victories as the legends. So I like that designation of the legends, but I think there needs to be a little bit more tweaking. But it does do a good job of kind of highlighting what it feels like right now. Of it's more likely that someone else hits their ceiling and is able to take down a legend and win that event.
Well, it makes me think like, okay, who has won events that are not those guys? That either the legends or the young guns, let's call them. So let's go back to the beginning of the season. I'll just go through it real quick. And let me sort by DGPT here. Okay, so going back to the beginning of 2023. Kyle Klein, Waco. Emerson Keith, OTB. Adam Hammis, Portland. Parker Welk, DDO. And then Simon, D-Glow. Well, the Simon's Legends, so never mind.
Simon's Legends.
So that's it. And like, of those, Hammis and Klein have shown Elite Series winning ability already. So then the only like ones that feel kind of like random are Emerson Keith and then obviously Parker Welk. And then we had Corey Ellis at European. The field is too... It encapsulates too much. I agree with you, Josh. Yeah. I think it's like young guns versus legends. If that's what I was going to go with, like kind of like what to call this right now. Sure, random people are going to win sometimes, but that's the exception, not the rule.
Right.
What's next?
Yeah. All right. Next one. Question/take from Owl P. Jackson. All majors need to count towards tour points and don't have playoff events in between don't have non-playoff events in between playoff events. Make the designation playoff meaningfully different, or just call them elite pluses. What other changes would you like to see happen to the majors or end of year schedule?
Great point. You know what they do on the PGA Tour? They have playoffs and the cuts are meaningful, and they go weekend 1, playoff event 1, big cut, weekend 2, playoff event 2, big cut, weekend 3, FedEx Cup Championship, whatever they call that. And that's it. 3 weeks, 3 events, playoffs, cut. That's what we need. Now, I'm not saying we're going to have them straight back to back to back weeks. If this fly doesn't get out of here, I'm going to lose my mind. But I do think it's weird to have a playoff event and then be like, oh, now we're going to go play Worlds. We're going to play a couple random silvers. And then we're going to come back to the playoffs. And then we're going to go to the U.S. Women's. And then we're going to go to USDGC. And then we're going to have the Pro Tour Championship. I mean, I get it. It's a different sport than the PGA Tour. The money, it's massively different. But number one, yes, all majors should count towards tour points. And there should be no drops. I mean, maybe you could go 3 of 4. To allow people to skip European, but like, why not do that? Like, we all agree they should matter the most, and I don't want to hear the argument about, well, the Pro Tour needs to, value its own tournaments more than the majors. No, it doesn't. It does not need to do that. The Pro Tour main revenue stream is DGN, and the majors are what people want to watch, and they should be promoting those as such, and they do. So. Let's make them all count, or maybe you get 1 drop. And then, yeah, the whole playoff Elite Plus thing needs to get reworked, as we've discussed.
Yep.
I'll just keep it moving. You have nothing to add?
Okay. No, I've got nothing to add. We've talked a lot about this. I think everyone knows how we feel about the playoffs.
It's getting towards dead horse status. Who is leading for Breakout Player of the Year in MPO and FPO? It's kind of like Rookie of the Year without the strict Rookie of the Year standards that tend to exclude players. This is from Zach.
I like this question a lot. I think it's much more interesting than Rookie of the Year because so many players play a couple events that disqualify them from Rookie of the Year designation. So I think this is a really good question. I don't know if he qualifies, but my initial gut reaction, and you tell me if you think this is a fair one, is Cole Ridall.
Definitely the first guy that came to my mind.
Yeah, like I don't think he was quite good enough in previous years to be established, and the win this season at Ledgestone really just elevates him to that position. So on the MPO side, Cole Ridall is the first name.
I also think you could make a pretty good case for Anthony Barella, James Proctor.
It feels funny.
I know.
It feels like a JK
because he's a little bit older. But I mean, in a lot of ways, and I know it's mostly because he's now gone on tour, but like he's had a pretty breakout type of year. But Cole's so young, he gets the win. He's not a rookie, but like has taken the big step forward. Feels like an obvious candidate. How about on the FPO side, Josh?
FPO side's so hard because you have Kristen who's just there. I
have my pick.
Okay. Oh man, this one's hard. I think my pick probably goes to Silva Saarinen.
Oh, okay. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, it was over in Europe, but it was enough. It was enough. And then 6th place at Worlds, like, I think she's done enough this year to establish herself as a breakout player.
Oh, I think it's a fine pick. A fine pick. I'm going to go with Allie Smith.
Okay, I thought about Allie. I think,
Allie Smith, not somebody that I really knew at all coming into this year. I think I heard her name, but, she gets the silver win. She gets the ace at Worlds. She's top 10 at Worlds. She's got other top 10s on the season. And when you look at the standings, she's the only player that's in the top like 20 that feels like a new name. Yeah. And that to me is a pretty good standard for thinking about breakout player. But I do like Silva Saarinen because she's been dominating in Europe and she came out of nowhere.
Right. And that's the thing. I mean, she's not going to reach the top 20 because she's only got silver points and had to start dropping first place finishes at silver events. So,
okay. Speaking of Worlds, this one comes from David, Josh. When did the Worlds become the World Championships, or has it always been, and I somehow missed that? Yeah, you just missed that. And why don't the other major individual sports like golf and tennis not have a World Championships? In a recent Upshot, you guys nitpicked about the number of rounds that constitutes the best World Championships, when the better debate is, should a single week competition infer the title World Champ when a non-World Champ could conceivably win all the other majors, the TGPT points race and championship, be player of the year, etc., etc. It seems to me more sensible to do as golf and tennis have, and have a Masters champion or a Wimbledon champion for their premier major while using the broad metrics to assess rank.
We've talked about this in past shows and it usually comes up when people like Ricky, for example, perform poorly at Worlds but have a really great season like last season and insist that maybe we shouldn't be calling it the world champion, despite the fact he still initials 2X on his signatures because it is a big deal. This is one area, like there's one half of my brain that logically, like this just makes sense. And I agree, and I want to agree logically. There are so many sports that are tour-esque that use the idea of season metrics, right? And look over the course of a season. But Worlds has always just been such a prominent focus in disc golf. It has always been distinguished from other majors in its format. And I think the other part of the problem that you run into is in tennis, for example, players from all around the world travel to all over the events all around the world. But with it's funny because I actually think the World Championship designation that's in a single week is actually more equitable to the Europeans who deserve an equal shot at the World Championship title, because how many of the Europeans actually can afford to come tour for an entire season over in the United States? Very few of them. And even Kristen, right? Kristen goes home during long stretches, and now she's good enough that she still stays at number one. But how unfortunate would that be if our best European players just never qualify for the World Championship title because they return home? Or you're splitting it, and so their series counts just as much over here as the United States. So you have European players whose names you aren't super familiar with because they're They're winning Prodigy Pro Tour events, and that counts the same as Ledgestone. I think that this World Championship, with where the sport is actually the most equitable way to get as many people to come and play and have a shot at the world title in regardless of where you are from. And so for that reason, I like it the way it is, and I wouldn't change it.
I personally just think it's a nomenclature issue. Like, sure, we call it the World Championship, but it doesn't mean that I believe that the person who wins the Worlds is the number one player. And like, yeah, we call them world champion. That's just a vestige of the way disc golf has done it. It is our Masters. Mm-hmm. It is our Wimbledon.
Right.
I don't know what else to tell you. Like, this is the one that matters the most. There's always going to be one, and this is ours. And it doesn't mean that Calvin, because he didn't win, isn't going to win Player of the Year and be considered the number one player in the world at the end of the season. It's just like, if you wanted, we could change the name, but I don't like that because I want the history of the World Championship. Mm-hmm. And Josh is completely right when he says that this is the one that all the players around the world travel to compete in. And guess what? In MPO, the top 12 rated guys were the top 14 finishers. So like, it's showing you who's the best. So I don't really have a problem with it. I get the argument, but I think you're nitpicking at the wrong thing. Nobody thinks that the world champion is the number one player because they won one tournament. But it does in fact matter the most of all the tournaments.
And showed up at the right time. Right. And that's the big part. Let's hit one more point on Worlds. Frank, longtime listener, always contributes. You know, we can't have a mailbag episode without an email from Frank. As a spotter, you bring your bag so it can bounce Isaac's disc back in bounds.
You didn't think about that one, did you, Josh?
I didn't think about that one. I need to follow the players that I like and just set my bag down right on the edge of the OB to help them out.
The best part of that is that it bounces off the bag and comes back in bounds. And after it bounces off, the guy moves the bag. It's like, dude, what are you doing? You should have just ducked away and not even been right. Like, I don't know whose bag that is.
Let the spotter take the heat for that. But that's what's funny to me. Like, you know how there's usually the debate about like what would have happened to the disc otherwise, but the spotter had the red flag up and had to look down and go, oh my gosh, that's still in bounds.
Oh my gosh. All right, let's see. How about this one? I'm going to ask a combo question here. This first one is from Nathan. Have you seen the price of Simon's new disc, the Time Lapse? My local retail notified everyone how this disc was much higher than other discs, and in the $35 to $40 range. I believe MSRP was $39.99. Do you think other companies may try to increase the price with sales of discs going down and contracts of players going up? And as a kind of a corollary question here from YR Trees, how do the economics of the sport look different now than they did a year ago? The DGPT wanted this to be a turn of profit year. Contracts were handed out both with a continued boom in mind. Contracts might not have figured out the expanded depth of the field in MPO. And how many full-time touring pros can the economics of the sport sustain? Well, it's a lot of different questions in one there, but keep in mind, just as a note, the new Simon time-lapse discs that are $40 are limited run, kind of like first edition collectors type items, and they are making stock runs that are going to be less expensive. I don't know how much less expensive, but Josh, your thoughts?
I don't think, it's, man, it is clear to me that a lot of I think what you're going to really see over the next couple of years is that the top players' contracts are going to continue to be massive, right? Paul Macbeth's contract was massive prior to COVID and the boom in the sport. And that is, I think, going to continue to be the case for a lot of retailers. Where I think you start to see the drop off is on secondary players and the ones who are behind their flagship. And that is going to become much more difficult. I think it's also going, and the other part that we've seen, as wins become more scarce, you're going to see more contracts, in my opinion, that are incentive laden, which we know Innova has done in the past, because you're able to sell commemorative discs at that point. It always has come back to the idea of how much money can this player bring in? How many discs are they going to be able to move? And if disc sales are going down and there are less people purchasing, especially commemorative or Tour Series discs, then I think contracts are absolutely going to follow. It's going to be a question then of how do they effectively monetize that in order to ensure that they're able to get the most value. Now, like I said, I think though that the top players are still going to rake in massive contracts, maybe not like they would have a couple of years ago, but are going to make a lot of money. But it's going to be people who can demonstrate and show that they are able to still move plastic or get the wins necessary to continue to sell commemorative discs in order to pay for their contracts.
Look, this is a very interesting situation. So first of all, let's talk about the time-lapse disc and the $40 price point. People are like mad about this, but why be mad at a company for assessing the value of the product to the market correctly? I talked about this like 5 years ago. Companies are selling discs at the time. It was like 20 for a kind of a top Tour Series disc. And they would sell out instantly, right? These Discmania drops, for instance. And they're getting scalped online for 80. MVP is like, well, why should we allow this first edition, first run? We know these are going to be valuable discs to get massively scalped. Instead, we're going to sell them at a price point that captures more of the profits for us and not for the scalpers on eBay. I have no problem with that. Now, What my general problem is that the price of discs overall, not just like these specialty one-off type things, has gone totally out of control and completely separated from the fundamentals of the cost of production. Now, I don't know specifically how much it costs to make a disc. I'm guessing it's probably like $2-3 a disc. You want to tell me it's $5 now? Fine, maybe with shipping and costs increasing, whatever. I doubt it's that much, but maybe. And there's R&D and everything else. But discs are so expensive now, and there's a total mismatch between companies were able to raise prices in 2020 and 2021 because discs were scarce, supply was shortened because of COVID restrictions and other things, and demand went through the ceiling. Now, demand has gone down because all the people who came into the sport have bought their discs and do not need more discs or are not buying 25 discs a year. They're buying 3 discs a year. And then, pace of new entrants is way slower. And supply has exploded because every company massively expanded during the pandemic, adding machines in order to meet that level of demand from 2 years ago. So the problem is that discs still cost the same amount of money. This is not sustainable. What we're going to see, and we're already seeing it, small retailers are going under because they're unable to move product. We're going to see big time discounts and sales at the end of this year. I promise you. It's probably already starting. Like if you want to get bundles, it's going to get cheaper per disc unit. And I think that represents an overall downturn in the disc golf economy that is affecting everything. And I definitely think it's going to affect contract season. I doubt we see another $1 million a year contract for a long, long time. I mean, Eagle is going to be the big get, right, out in this offseason. Gannon Burr, those two guys, like, what are their contracts going to look like? Who has the money? Is somebody going to want to pay $1 million a year? I just don't know if I see it. I don't know if I see it right now. I'm sure they're still going to get paid very well, Josh, but not to the same extent. And, Pro Tour just laid some people off. They basically cut their whole team that does non-live content for DGN. And so it's not all roses out there right now. That's not to say that things are a disaster. These companies are still highly profitable, but I mean the manufacturers. I doubt that Disc Golf Pro Tour turns a profit this year.
Interesting time. All right. Next question for you. This one is about a little bit about money as well. This comes from Andrew. He says, my family's been longtime listeners to the Upshot, as disc golf is a big passion. As I write, I'm watching Coco Gauff in the U.S. Open tennis finals. While Coco is fun to watch, yes, she is, it is the 50 years emblem on the court that inspired me to write. Most people will tune in to watch the U.S. Open finals this year. Will tune in. More people will tune in to watch the U.S. Open's finals this year than the men's. Why? 50 years of equal pay for men and women. Like disc golf, professional tennis is a tour, and touring costs the same for women as it does for men. That's such a good point. Real fast, before I continue, I think that point is not highlighted enough, is that touring costs the same for women as it does men. Just because less people tune in to their tour does not mean that it costs them any less to do the same thing. Because that's a good point, Andrew. Thank you. The pay in tennis is the same. As we know, you've discussed it's not the same in disc golf. Professional disc golf is in its nascent years. This is a chance for disc golf not only to be on the right side of history, but also to develop into a sport with two competitive revenue-producing divisions, men's and women's, rather than one. While the gap in pay may seem sizable now, it's growing each year. As you recently report, purses are growing at 20% per year. At the 2021 Worlds, the top MPO won $6,000 more than the top FPO. At the rate we are going in just 15 years, the difference would be nearly $100,000. Statmando and a few Excel formulas can provide an even more accurate figure to the growing disparity and the diminishing chances of ever having equal pay. The women's game should not have to wait for equality. The entertainment and fun of the women's division is equal now. My son, 11 years old, wears Paige Pierce merch, and he plays and follows the top FPO when we go to the OTB Open. I hope to be watching women's disc golf on ESPN Live in 2073 with 50 years of equal pay next to the tee pad at each hole. There's a model for success. Now let's go, Coco.
Incredible match between Coco and Sabalenka, by the way. Amazing experience. I think I basically agree with the overall premise that disc golf should be moving towards a future where, at least at the majors, we do have equal payouts across the two divisions. Part of the problem right now, when you look at the U.S. Open, for instance, in tennis, there's an equal number of players in the two fields. And in disc golf, we're not even close, right? They were like triple the number of men competing compared to women. Hence, the differences in payout. When you look at it as a percentage of the field and percentage of the purse, like a lot of that is very much equitably based right now. I really believe that there has been a concerted effort from the Pro Tour to put FPO on the same standing as MPO. Watch a DGN broadcast and tell me you can tell the difference in terms of the way the two divisions are represented in the media. There is no difference. It's the same. They get their own show. They used to be, they would have the FPO going. Or no, they have the MPO going, and the FPO would tee off, and you'd see like a couple shots of their front nine, but you're mostly watching the MPO finish, and then after that, you would get the final 9 holes of FPO, approximately. Mm-hmm. And it was an annoying experience for everybody, right? Like fans.
Which the Pro Tour acknowledged.
Which is why they switched it. But yeah. I think we have to be realistic in terms of when we can expect something like this to change. What I don't want to see is people bitching when a tournament does do an equal payout for the top competitors in both MPO and FPO, and people are whining and complaining about it. Oh, well, the MPO deserved to get more. Stop. If the tournament wants to put money into the pot for FPO, that's great. And we should be celebrating that kind of thing. When a sponsor is specifically asking for it to happen, I would love to see more activations like that, where a sponsor specifically says, at least for the winner, I want to see the same payout, right? At Worlds this year, it was double the payout for MPO than compared to FPO for the winners. I would love to see that get to parity sooner rather than later. The argument against that, of course, is that it really enriches Kristen Tatar at the expense of other players down the board who need the money more. And that's a realistic argument in today's day and age, right? This is not a situation where the top 20 players all have Rolex sponsorships and are making millions of dollars whether they win or not. Disc golf is just in a very different part of its growth curve, and we need to acknowledge that. I do think that Andrew's on the right track in terms of thinking this is where we want to be eventually.
only other thing I would add to that is I think there's a real opportunity to find 2 or 3 sponsors who sponsor $1,000 per. If you, let's say you got 3 sponsors, they each gave $1,000 per event, and all the podium for FPO each get an extra $1,000, and you just run that on every broadcast. You shout out your FPO sponsors who are bumping up the payouts. It's easy advertising. I think it's a really, really compelling advertising slot. People love advertising that can also move towards, social good, right? Which that parody, I think, is one that would, as we know, Des Moines, the sponsor explicitly said, I want this money to go. We'll up our sponsorship, but we want it to go to the FPO payout. You sell those 3 spots, you really advertise them well, and I think you could bump it up and work on that equal parity with a pretty easy advertising slot to sell.
All right, this is not a question, but just a comment from Kyle. I believe we talked about the European FPO dominance at Worlds, and noted the difference compared to MPO. I believe some part of the European FPO dominance can be explained simply by the talent pool. Unfortunately, we are all aware of the sometimes unapproachable nature of our sport. In a space which is dominated by men ages 25 to 50 in the U.S., a lot of clubs, leagues, and courses are not welcoming environments for women to enjoy disc golf. Across the pond, it seems that disc golf is a lot less of a niche activity, with many families and kids enjoying playing and spectating the sport. In my experience, places which already have women and children in them are going to be a lot more welcoming to women. In addition, disc golf has a much larger share of the national interest in many of the countries where we see the top athletes playing. With more exposure to the sport, more women are going to have a chance to play, and if they are good, they may pursue it further. Simply having more women touch and throw a disc for the first time will, over time, create a larger and statistically better field of FPO pros. I will also note a couple people pointed out that the Nordic European countries tend to have a very high standard of living, and that could have something to do with this as well. I don't know why that would manifest itself more in terms of women than men, but I wanted to point that out.
It doesn't answer, I think this is a fair point, but there are 2 things that I think are unproven in Kyle's statement that I have a question about. Number one is, it says it's a lot less niche activity with many families and kids enjoy playing and spectating the sport. Is that true? And to what extent is that true? Because I already see a lot of families becoming involved, especially post-COVID here in the United States. And I don't think that explains European FPO players who have been good for a long time, but, and just are recently really elevating. That doesn't explain to me why the FPO players are better right now. That's too late to be the explanation. And so that's the first hang up that I have here. The second one that I have is I understand that it's a niche sport, and it's a sport, in the US it's a space dominated by men ages 25 to 50, but I don't know if it's different in Europe, and my assumption would actually be towards the opposite. I would assume that it is the same in Europe, or would be the same until I am shown otherwise, and then I would like to see if the clubs are different. What did the clubs do different? How are they run or structured differently than the US? Does every club have a women's league that is paired along with it in Europe? So I just have a lot of questions about what came first. Why is the FPO sport where it is right now? And I would really like that with someone who has with a little bit more, someone from Europe, to be honest. And maybe Kyle is from Europe, and maybe this is exactly the case. But there's just questions to me about the truthfulness of these statements as opposed to anecdotally or just a sense or a feeling of how it might be, and how does that explain today's professional scene?
My guess is the answer is that it's randomness.
That's maybe.
Okay. Over the next 5 years, the last question in our mailbag. Over the next 5 years, which MPO players will have the most Pro Tour wins? This is from Hot Pink Bug in the Discord. Hot Pink's picks are Gannon Burr, Calvin Heimberg, and Isaac Robinson. And then Ricky Wysocki as his 4th pick. People forget he is only 30, he says. Last pick would be Cole Redallen. I think he has the most complete game potential. This leaves Eagle, Paul, Simon, AB, Kyle Klein, Chris Dickerson, and Ezra Robinson all off my list. What's your list?
I'll take Gannon Burr, Eagle McMahon and I want to say Anthony Barella just to watch your head spin, Charlie.
My head won't spin.
Do it. No. And Cole Radallen.
It's a good list. Gannon Burr, Cole Radallen, Anthony Barella. That's my list.
He's got to get the first one. He's just got to get the first one. The problem is, see, Anthony Barella is either going to lead this list or he's not going to have one.
It feels so true. I feel so true. Oh, man. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Always enjoy the mailbag. You can get in touch with us. Give us your thoughts at upshot@ultiworld.com or mailbag@ultiworld.com. For Josh Mansfield, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long, and we will talk to you on Thursday. Get you ready for the MVP Open right here on the Upshot.